I wish Brad wouldn't slide us in while Martin is muted. Martin, can you unmute, please? We're going live now.
You want
Oh,
me to
crap.
mute? You want me on mute?
So we can unmute you before we start.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the August edition of NMRAx. Today we have our very own Martyn Jenkins giving us a clinic about the lost layout of Mick Williams. Martin, take it away.
Good morning there, Speed, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending wherever you are in the world. Yeah, they've rolled me out to do a clinic. Apparently, I've just come from the Redlands Model Train Show, and yeah, it was a good day there. And I'm doing a clinic, then I'm going to bed, and I'm getting up and heading back to the Redlands Model Train Show tomorrow. So yeah. Anyway, let's hit the presentation, and we'll take it from there. So, without any rehearsal from Speed, I'll see if my PowerPoint works. And there we go. It looks like everything's going there. So what we're going to do today is have a little look at a clinic I first saw in 2015 at the Portland NMRA convention, and it was done by a chap by the name of Kermit Paul, who unfortunately this year passed away. But Kermit did this clinic on the lost layout, the secret model railroad down under, and now it could be told. And that had me intrigued because I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know what layout was apparently down under that no one had spoken about. So I went to the clinic and I was totally fascinated. It was about a chap who had a very large O scale and gauge 1 display in a suburb just south of Sydney. And this layout was quite spectacular. He actually built a separate building to house his model railway collection in. So I started to delve a bit deeper into it, and I found out that a chap that lives in Brisbane, just up the road from where I live, Craig Woodhead, was the live-in engineer there. So I managed to speak to both Kermit and Craig Woodhead, and got permission off them to put together a bit of a clinic, because I thought, well, the people in America now know about it, but people in Australia don't. So I've been going around doing this clinic now for a couple of years, and I've done a couple of after-dinner speaker spots where we've had a look at this layout. But anyway, so without any further ado, we'll go through this PowerPoint, and you'll have to listen to the dulcet tones of me explaining what's happening in each of the slides. And then at the end, there's a short video that was put together on the layout. Anyway, so in the late 70s, there was a chap by the name of Mick Williams, Mick Marsden Williams. And he had a layout built on his estate near Sydney, Australia, to operate the large collection of O-scale trains he had. And this is basically a story about the team that built and designed the layout for him, and a bit of a story on the layout itself, because it's quite spectacular when you look at some of the photos. Basically, the layout was built in secret because Mick was a fairly wealthy industrialist, and he didn't want people knowing he had this large railway collection. And so the layout was all designed basically for his entertainment only. If you did go there, you actually had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that you wouldn't talk about it, and no photos were to be taken of the layout while he was alive. The owner, Mick Marsden was his name, Mick Williams. The guy that project managed the actual build, which was the building of the building as well as the layout itself, was John Millington. The layout was designed by a chap in California by the name of Brooks Bowman. All the train controls were done by Kermit Paul, and it's pretty spectacular when we look at the train control system that he employed. Remember, this is back in the 1970s, well before DCC was even invented. And then some aspects from Craig, who was the live-in engineer. Yes, this guy actually employed someone to live in his train shed and maintain all his collection for him. And then after Craig left, the resident engineer was a chap by the name of Steve Flint, who's in the video and describing some of the layout in there. But like I said, it was a purpose-built building. It was two layouts basically: a European section and an American section. And the layout was in O scale, so it was all two-rail O scale. Like I said, this was way before the invent of DCC or any digital type of control. So they were all analog controls. And as you can see there, this photo was taken from the control panel with the USA section on the left-hand side. That was the control panel for that. And on the right-hand side, part of the control panel for the European section. The control panels were all anodized stainless steel. They remind me of a 1960s audio mixing console when you have a look at them. They were just spectacular pieces of engineering. There's another shot there of the layout in the layout room itself, and they called the building that he had the tea house or the train house. Basically, what happened is next to his home up in the hills behind Mittagong on the south coast of New South Wales, he had his house, and he bought the house next door to put his layout in there. Not being satisfied with the house, he actually had it demolished, and he had a purpose-built building put in there which housed his layout. So this is that building. Unfortunately, now it's been sold and it's been converted into a home. So this no longer exists. As we can see there on the left hand on the photo there, the yards up on the actual layout. There's not much scenery. Mick wasn't interested in scenery. He just wanted to see trains moving, and so the layout was designed in that fact. You can see a couple of the yards there, but underneath the layout was a huge storage yard as well, which we will see. There's another photo there of the building itself. And as you can see on the outside there, that's the eaves of the actual house on the outside, and it was all Jarrah wood out there. We can see another shot here of the roundhouse, so the automated turntables. So these turntables were indexed and automated, so he could push a button up on the control panel, and the turntable would automatically rotate to the exact spot that he wanted. All the track work that we're going to see on this layout was all hand laid, and when we get to some points, you'll actually see inside double slips on a curve that go through like two sections of track. Well, they were all handmade, and this is back well before fast tracks or any of those jigs or tools were invented. So this was all manufactured well before that. So it was all hand filing and putting patterns down and then creating the rail to fit the patterns. So Mick Williams was a industrialist. He had a company called Shin Engineering, and he did a lot of the civil work on a large dam project down in Sydney on the called the Snowy River. And he also owned a number of engineering companies. Because his love for trains started when he was a kid, as most of us, it happens, was watching coal trains near Wollongong along the Australia's east coast. And from that, he got a fascination for model railways. So in later years, when he was wealthy enough, he built this huge collection. And if we get that, here we go. There's some photos there of Mick taking delivery of his latest BMW when that first came out. But The two photos on the right are rather interesting. That's Mick sitting entertaining in court there with his glass of red wine. And with him is John Millington in the white jumper, who is the project engineer for the train house. And on the far left is Kermit Paul, who was the guy who did this presentation originally, and also designed the control system for him. Down the bottom right-hand corner is a very interesting photo. Again, Mick sitting in the middle there, looking at his empty glass of wine, wondering whether we should open another bottle. And to his left is the guy that started Australian Model Railway Imports, Klaus. But on the right-hand, to his left-hand side, to Mick's left-hand side, is Mr. Sam Honkser. So he came out to have a look at the layout and look at where all these models that this guy in Australia had bought and was actually running, because Mr. Sam Honkser designed all these beautiful locos. As we all know, Sam Honkser is a big manufacturer of brass locomotives and the likes, but they were all meant to be displays that sat in a cabinet. But Mick actually had them running on the layout, and he came out to Australia just to see the actual layout. It was funny because at that time there was another guy up in Queensland had a moderate O-scale layout who was doing the same thing, but his layout was open to the general public. And around this time, I remember working there, and all of a sudden this chap rolling up and introducing himself as Mr. Sam Honkser. And this was after he'd been down to see Mick Williams' layout in Sydney. He came up to look at Bob Harris's one up in Brisbane. And yeah, it was a bit of a shock. We didn't know why he was in the country. And anyway, okay, I'm going to the next one. So the train house. It was a 2-level design, 3,500 square feet in area. And it had a large layout and entertainment area up in the upper level. Mick, being a businessman, used to entertain a lot of overseas celebrities and the likes, as most businessmen do when they came to Australia. And instead of hiring a highfalutin restaurant and a big hotel in the city, he decided that he was going to use his train house as an entertainment area. So there was a large bar, there was a commercial kitchen built into the train house, and a large entertainment area outside that had a huge waterfall and water feature in there, as Mick was very much influenced by Japanese architecture and Japanese gardens. Downstairs, there was the display cabinets, which we'll see in the video, with the 132nd collection and the Gauge 1 collection. It had guest rooms, it had a flat in there for the live-in engineer, and it had a big workshop to maintain all of the collection. So here we go. After he knocked down the existing house that was on the property next door to him, he started to make his train shed or his train house. I mean, who starts building their layout with a D7 Caterpillar bulldozer and digging half a mountain away? It's only someone like Mick Williams that would do that. You see down the bottom, they're laying the slab for the bottom level of the train house. And one thing that always gets me when I look at these photos is the distinct lack of PPE or high-vis clothing. As you can see, the chap on the left here, he's basically got a pair of jeans on and a pair of boots and a pair of gloves, and that's about it for safety gear. So, as I said, this was all way back in about 1974 when this was being done. So you see there, the building's starting to take place. It was perched high up in the mountains, so it looked down over the coastline there at Mittagong. And as you can see on the left-hand side, they're starting to do the finish off the ground floor foundations, and there's all the steel work in there to hold the next level. And they're starting to build that now, the concrete wall. So as you can see, it was quite an extensive build, and they're putting the beams in there with the crane for the second floor. And this is the photo of the entertainment section that he had built outside. So as you can see on the left-hand side, the Atco shed had a big pool underneath it. So there's the workers' lunchroom shed. It was up there. They built a big pool there, and as you can see in the top right-hand corner, they made a dam wall. And then down on the bottom is a photo of the finished area. So that pool at the top was filled up with water, and then they had a big cascading waterfall down through a creek that ran down underneath the paved entertaining area. And of course, as most Aussies would have, on the left-hand side he's got a barbie. So we're not going to throw any shrimp on the barbie because in Australia we only have prawns. Shrimp are just large fleas in Australia. So yeah, we'd throw a couple of prawns on the barbie, and that was his outdoor entertaining area. When we go inside, as you can see, it was built, you can tell by the decor that it was built in the 70s, with the gold etched bar at the front here, and then his wine collection at the back. And then down on the bottom right-hand corner, we've got a photo of the storage area before the display cabinets went in. On the right-hand side, behind that panelled wall, is where the workshop was that was in there. So we'll look at some plans in a minute. That was the entrance to the train shed, or the tea house, once it was finished. So as you can see, it's quite a grand entry to get in there with slate tiling on the floor there. And on the right hand side down the bottom here, we can see another photo of the finished train house with the layout room up the top, and then down the bottom the storage and display area and the kitchens and apartment for the live-in engineer. Okay, so who was the living engineer? So it was this chap, and I'll have a little drink there. There was this chap by the name of Craig Woodhead, who owned a company called EDA Electronics, which manufactured train control systems, so power supplies and DC train controllers like we used to have back in the 70s before digital DCC came out. He manufactured the AutoCab system under license from Kermit Paul, and he was the resident engineer at the train house for 9 years. He's also a long-time NMRA member in Division 1, and when he finished at the train house, there's a picture of Craig there in his younger days in the workshop of the train house, and there's a picture of him today down the bottom there with his 2 sons and his wife. And he owns a shop up in Brisbane called Hobbyrama, which is probably one of the largest hobby shops one of the last hobby shops in Brisbane, brick and mortar stores that are still about. And they cover everything from RC cars through to die-cast collectibles through to model trains and the whole lot. So Craig's still about. He's still active in the hobby, and he's still active in running his shop along with his 2 sons. So the trains. So most of them were made by Tenoshoda, Samhongsa, and other manufacturers like that. They were all brass. They were either O or 1/32 scale trains, or gauge 1 trains. Many were exclusive production runs made for certain people. I remember Craig telling me one story about when he went to Mick went to Europe once, and Marklin was bringing out a brass crocodile, which is a European loco. But back in those days, and we're talking about the 70s, they were around about $5,000-$6,000 a loco in gauge 1. And Mick bought 12 of them, 1 in every colour that they made. So, like I said, he wasn't short of a quid. And if he saw something that he really liked, he would buy a number of them. And we'll see that in the collection later on when we look at the video. So the design and the construction was done by a guy by the name of Brooks Bowman from Southern California. And the idea was to run as many trains automatically for Mick to sit there and watch. He didn't like actually running the trains himself, and he didn't want a large operating crew there, but he wanted lots of trains running, and he didn't want any scenery or anything to get in the way. He just wanted to see the operation of the trains themselves. Here's a copy of the drawings of the train house when he built it. So we got the stairs on the left-hand side coming in. You can see the bar area which he took. We've seen those photos of him sitting down with different people, having a nice glass of red there, and then outside to the entertainment area outside, and then this big massive area in here was where the layout was based. And if we look at the next drawing, this is the drawing of the bottom section. So up the top here, we've got the workshop. So that was the workshop there with the stairs going up to the train place upstairs. And then over here on the right-hand side, we have the accommodation for the live-in engineer. So as you can see, there was a toilet, bathroom, a kitchen in there, a lounge room, and 2 separate bedrooms that were in there for the live-in engineer. So that's where Craig lived for 9 odd years until he decided he was getting married and going to start his own business up in Brisbane. If we have a look here, there's a panoramic shot of the actual upstairs of the train shed or the train tea house after the layout was removed. The people that bought it after Mick passed away, because none of this could be disclosed while he was alive. It was only after he passed away in 2013 that we were allowed to talk about this, and all of this came to fruition. So as you can see there, the layout's all gone. Unfortunately, by the time Craig had got up there, that's Craig on the left-hand side, most of the layout had all been chopped up and taken to the tip. So he was only able to rescue some parts of the track work, which is very sad because he hand-laid all the track work that was in this layout. And it's now been converted into a house. So all this has been divided up into bedrooms, lounge rooms, and the likes, and it's now been turned into a standard dwelling. So we can see there the 2 layouts, the track plan. So this is the upper deck of the layout with the 2 turntables. As I said, one half was European, the other half was USA based. And you could actually run a train through the hidden storage underneath from one section to the other. So it could take quite a while for the same train to actually make its way up into both sections. But as you can see, there's both have got a very large yard section. And if you look over here, you can see on the track plan, the double crossovers that he made that went from one track. So these are double crossovers on a curve, and they're all hand-laid and handmade. Underneath, this was the hidden storage, and it had occupancy detection in there. When you look at the video later on, you'll see when they show the underside of the layout, all these lights. So all the occupancy detection was done optically. And so because this was hidden storage, above each above each sensor for the occupancy detection, there was an incandescent light. And when the train passed over between the light and the sensor, obviously it put it into darkness, and the system recognized that that's where the train was at that time. So like I said, this was all done well before digital control or anything like that came about. And we'll look at the control system later on, because that's pretty spectacular on its own. So how are we doing here for time? We're doing well. There's 25. So yeah, so Craig started to copy the track plan over into a CAD drawing, and these were the results of it. So what was the layout made out of? It was all Tasmanian redwood timber, which these days now would be a rarity. And like I said, all of this ended up at the tip. So, yeah, it's rather sad. But the top was 20 mil plywood with a 12 millimeter K-Nite, or We call it kainite in Australia, but it's homosote in America, top surface. And here's some photos of the layout being built up on the upper deck. So this would be the hidden storage here, and then this would be the upper deck of the layout across the top here. We can see some other photos there of the actual construction. And like I said, all of this track is all hand-laid track. So it's not, there's no Atlas or micro-engineering set track used in this layout at all. It's all hand-laid. So these lengths of track were manufactured in a jig or an assembly off-site and then laid into and then put into the layout. I think the only thing they had was track setters, which are an English invention for straightening out your track and the likes. So it was all nickel silver, code 125, prefabricated in Japan with Japanese cherry wood ties. The complex track work, as I said, was made by Craig Woodhead, and it was all made on site. And it included inside and outside double slip switches on vast curbs. Because basically the entry to get into the hidden storage was straight after the curves, and you could go from any track on the main line straight across and down into hidden storage by these double slips. All the switches were operated by PFM switch motors, which were an early version of the tortoise switch motors. And then they used a diode matrix to switch the polarity for the routes so that you had a constant feed of power heading straight into each of the hidden storage yards. Whoop, hang on, I think we just missed a slide there. Let's go back. And there we go. We can see some of the photos there of the track work. So as you can see, there's point work here. I mean, you've got a curved track here, and we've got 3 sets of points. It's like a curved 3-way going through there. Well, that's all hand laid without the use of fast tracks jigs or anything like that. It's all hand bent and set with basically a template, and then manufacture the pieces of rail to go over the top. But there's no filing jigs or whatever, so these were all filed by hand for each of the installations. As you can see down here, where the switch machines and the blades would have actually moved on the points to set the different routes. But that's some example of the track work that Craig made. As I said, it was spectacular when you see it on the video. So the turntables. So he had 2 48 stall tracks on these turntables, and they were machined aluminium, and they were custom made by his engineering company. They were all computer controlled. Well, originally they were relay logic controlled, but eventually they were transferred to computer control, and there was a 286 PC that used to run both of the 2 turntables. So, like I said, we're back in the 1970s, so even if when they did make it computer controlled, it was very, very basic computing. There was no super duper machines like you have today. Here's a picture of the controller up on the panel itself, and like I said, the control panel was like a mixing console from EMI in the Beatles era. It truly was a work of art, and luckily we've got one of the control panels, which is now at the Railway Museum in Ipswich, up in Queensland. So as you can see, you dial it round to whichever track you wanted the turntable to go to, and then you can see there 3 LEDs that would light up. Well, actually, sorry, I'll rephrase that. They're not LEDs, they're incandescent lamps that would light up red, yellow, and green to tell you whether the track was aligned and the track power was connected, so you could drive straight from the road on the turntable onto the turntable itself, and then you could turn the index around to then take it out on the output track. Down below is a picture of the back of that switch itself, and you couldn't buy a switch with all the contacts that they needed. So his engineering company actually designed and built the rotary switches to operate the turntables. But if you look at the wiring, I mean, it's just like I said, a work of art. This whole layout, everything about it was a work of art, and no dollar was spared on making it. There's the indexing, so there's the rings that tell the system where it's been indexed, and then the power that's delivered to both the track and the turntable bridge itself, and then the motor that's underneath that drives the actual turntable. So this was all custom made. It was all made out of machined aluminium. As I said, nothing like this had been built before, not in this scale anyway. So there was a lot of firsts in there. We can see this young chap here. I've forgotten his name, but he's actually doing the programming of the PC that ran the turntable. But again, on the left-hand side, you can see some of this track work that Craig had built, and you can see these double slips coming up onto a curve, going down into hidden storage, and then coming back up on the two right-hand main lines. So, like I said, all of that was pretty spectacular. Down on the bottom right, we've got a picture of the turntable. Now, the interesting thing to note on the turntable, there was 48 roads that came in, but they were hard to count and work out which one was which. So Mick got half a dozen brass locos and had them painted all white. And those locos sat in those roads to mark, I think it was every fifth bay across, so that they could count which road they wanted to get the loco out. So these locos that were in the roundhouse that were painted white never used to go anywhere. They would just sit there as markers, so they knew which road was what, and they could count them from a distance. So Kermit Paul, who lives up in the Bay Area, I believe, was contracted to design and supply the control system to operate up to 20 trains automatically with only one or two operators in the room. So what he used was the Auto Cab Progressive Cab Control System, which was originally designed by Lynn Westcott. So, as it says here, it was described in 1950s by Lynn Westcott of Model Railroader magazine as a system that automatically connects each train's cab to the blocks that are ahead of it and are occupied by the train at that time. So basically what they had was a bunch of cabs that would automatically switch from each block to each block as the train moved around the layout. So this system was designed by Kermit in the 70s as a modular PCC system suitable for any size of layout or track plan. The logic was all done with relay and diode based, since there was no computers or no automation in that time. But later on, the system was actually the foundation of Bruce Chubb's occupancy detection. So this is where it came from. The system that Bruce Chubb ended up developing, except by the time Bruce had done that, there was a bit more electronics, but this was all back when it was just relay logic and the likes. So not designed for automatic train operation per se. This was a design, a display type layout. It included an auto engineer feature, which would then operate the layout with maybe only one person there, but up to 20 trains running. And so in this mode, you had cab signals, yellow and green, yellow, red and green. The yellow and red signals applied the train brakes, and the green cab signals released the train brakes. Very simple, but a very effective automated control system. And there we've got a picture of one of the two control racks that was shipped from the USA to Australia to run this layout. So on the left-hand side, we've got the power supplies for the 10 cabs. And then as we go across from left to right, they are all the blocks for each cab, which would get switched automatically by relay logic as the train was detected moving through the layout. So it would switch to the current area where the train was and the cab or the block ahead of it. And it would move the output from these cab controllers on the left-hand side along the layout. So as you can see there by the two chaps standing next to the crate that they built to put the control system in to ship it out to Australia, and there were two of these panels, one for each layout. So as you can see, it's quite extensive, the control system. So there were 10 amp transistor throttles with inertia effects. You had the 3-color signaling system, and you could either have it in manual or automatic engineer mode for each cab. So if you decided that he wanted to run one of the trains on his own, he could go up to the control panel and select that particular cab or that particular model, and he could run that manually. And by manually, with a throttle like we'd have today. There's a picture of the control panel for one of the layouts. As you can see, it goes up to number 10. And this is what I mean about whenever I look at this, it reminds me of, a mixing console that Abbey Road that the Beatles might have used. Up the top, you've got an amp meter and a voltmeter next to each other, all analog, of course. On the left-hand side, then coming down the panel, you've got the 3 incandescent lights that give you red, yellow, and green to tell you whether you've got a block that's occupied ahead. If you have, the yellow will come on, put the brakes on half. If it's the next one is got a train sitting in there, the red one will come on and stop the train altogether. You've got the inertia controls on the right-hand side with a toggle switch for the direction down below, and then the potentiometer right at the bottom to adjust the speed of that particular model. And like we said, when it was in auto cab mode, there was a servo switch next to it, or a servo motor that would drive that control potentiometer to speed up or slow down the model. But like I said, these panels were all custom made for the layout, and it really was a work of art. And it's like a 1970s hi-fi system there with the anodized aluminium and the etched lettering and the likes on there. So why not DCC? Well, it just wasn't about at that time. In 1972, no one had even thought about DCC at that time. Progressive cab control was about the only thing that you could do, and imagine if it was an early DCC system, the size of the decoders would be huge to go in a train drawing. Each of these trains drew up to a couple of amps each when they were running, so the decoders would have had to been fairly hefty using the electronics of that day. And of course, it did what he wanted to do. So the signaling system, so we just had cab signals for the operators of the trains. There was no actual trackside signals provided, and the occupancy detection was done by an optical system, which if you go back, if you've got an old version of Model Railroader and go back to August of 1973, there's a description in there about how the optical track detection system worked. But it basically used op amps and optical sensors. No sound, because of course nothing in those days could have replicated sound. And there was no convenient space available in the panels or anything to locate the sound systems. And Mick never really expressed any desire to actually hear sounds. I mean, if he saw what we can do with DCC and sound today, it'd be a totally different story. But back then, the closest you could get to sound was a reel-to-reel audio recorder underneath the layout playing ambient sounds. The track routing, Conventional track diagram with block occupancy lights and switch controls located between the American and the European cabs allowed what they call the flyover, where you could go from the European or the American into the European and back again. So there's a picture of two people. I think that's John Millington on the right and Craig on the left, running trains on the American section of the layout. And as you can see, in the center there is the control panel for all the points and switches and route switching. You can see the rotary dial there for the turntable to make that spin round. And then you can see up in on the yards that are in hidden storage and up on the layout, there's indication there of whether they're occupied or not. As I said, there's no DCC, so we haven't got anything fantastic in there telling us what actual train's there. It's just saying, is there a train there or not? There's a closer look at the control panel, and as I said, they're like a work of art. And we were lucky enough when the layout was pulled out that Craig did manage to get one of these control panels before they were damaged. The other one apparently was crushed, so it was beyond repair. And that's at the Ipswich Railway Museum, along with the collection, where the collection resides today. Here's a shot there of the workshop. As you can see, for early 70s, it's got a computer in there. Mick didn't spare any money with his hobby. Here's the tools that they use to make all the track work, the grinder for cutting the track work up and the likes. And if you look up on the left-hand side, they're on a rolling road as one of the Gauge 1 models that he had. There's a picture of the boys when they were laying the track for the actual roundhouse. It's John on the left and one of his helpers on the right. And as you can see, they've got real 1970s hairstyles. So now, what happened to the collection at the end? After Mick passed away, his family divided the collection up, and he willed most of it to the Workshops Railway Museum in Ipswich, Queensland. In Ipswich, we've got a large railway workshop, which was where Queensland Railways was basically started, and he willed the collection there, which at the moment is all being catalogued and is actually on display. You can go and look on their website and see all the models actually on there. But the idea is Craig is trying to get some room in the actual museum to create either the European or the American layout, and actually have these models running, because although Mick did will them to the museum, he didn't want them to sit in display cabinets. He wanted them to be running like he used to see them running. So that's still being worked at, and as you can imagine, with any government-controlled museum or the likes, it's going to be a long and arduous process before that happens. There's the Railway Museum up in Brisbane, and we can see the collection there. So I believe there's a video that Brad has got there ready to run. So if you want to run that video and let us know when it's coming towards the end, we'll let everyone see what the train house looked like in real life.
This modest house, nestled unobtrusively in a leafy Wollongong suburb, is home to one of the world's largest collection of model trains, close to 20,000 items collected by Marsden Mr. Mick Williams. The tea house features thousands of pieces of rolling stock from Z gauge to 1, modelled after trains representing 11 different nations, handcrafted by the best model makers in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, France, Japan and South Korea. Entry to the tea house passes the workshop, where a full-time technician maintained the collection for nearly 20 years. A team of people, working to the precise direction of Mr. Mick, developed the building, built the layout, set up the displays and maintained inventory. Their collaborative effort resulted in the creation of the magical train house. The original residence on the site proved inadequate as the collection grew, and a new brick and slate building was designed to house the 1-gauge locomotives in glass cases on the first level. Thousands of HO gauge models, packaging never opened, rest at the ready for a layout that never materialised. From the early 1980s to early 2000, only pieces judged by Mr. Mick to be excellent were added to the collection, mostly 1 and O gauge. The HO and N pieces were packed away to make room for German, Swiss, Austrian and French. German through to American. German, French, Swiss and a few Japanese locos were commissioned, ordered, received and included in the collection.
I suppose it's just a natural progression up through from N gauge to HO to O gauge. Eventually 1 gauge is probably the most sophisticated, the best detailed, the best engineered gauge. So, I mean, obviously the closer you get to the prototype, the better the model's going to be.
As demand for Australian locos of this quality and value was limited, Reynolds models represent Australia.
My jaw dropped the first time I walked in.
The tea house second level featured 2 custom-designed O-gauge model railway layouts with computer-driven and monitored controls along 4.5 kilometres of hand-extruded nickel-silver track. Complete with sensors along the track, relays and touchscreen controls, the quality and volume has no equal in Australia. In the late 20th century, as computers evolved, so did the technology applied in the layout at the tea house. Capable of running 20 trains at one time, a day of operation could accommodate 240 working models. Meanwhile, another 400 pieces of the collection, locos and other rolling stock stood ready to serve in the roundhouses and lay-bys of the 2 halves of the layout.
He dressed it up to the point where he could still see the trains. If there was more buildings, trees and landscapings, it would have blocked the vision of what he really wanted to see. His passion was locomotives. He wanted to have a layout for them to run on, but the scenery wasn't near as important as the mechanical item running around the track.
The capacity of this layout to run trains is unequalled in Australia.
The whole thing is as best as we possibly could do with the materials that we had available at the time. It was a progression thing. Originally the layout was built, it operated with relays. Each block was set up and operated with relays. That was a good system for a while, and of course in the end it ended up being computer controlled. We've got optical sensors around the track, and we tried to make it as perfect for him as we could.
Some of their track work is really beautiful. Those crossings and switches built on the curves, they're really exceptional.
The layout consists of two parts, modelled on the operating systems of two different continents, American rail and European rail. Trains can fly over to the other continent to complete a full circuit, which takes around 40 minutes. In his 70s, Mr. Mick finally commissioned a piece of rolling stock to run on his layout in honour of the train that started the collection.
Of course, the Thurrool was a railway yard, and that, of course, was the interest. There's a small truck here. It always fascinated me. It's the simplest truck. I can remember them coming to Thurrool in reality. Very simple. Not to the extent where I went to Korea to have it made as a proper model.
The O-gauge rolling stock, the items collected to run on the layout, comprise about 20% of the total number of pieces in the collection. The 1-gauge locos displayed behind glass are the jewels of the collection. For Mr. Mick, the collection was never about numbers. It was about engineering quality, detail and accuracy to the actual locomotive. In the 1-gauge, this is most obvious, most critical. Until now, the tea house collection was truly a secret. Fewer than 40 people visited the tea house, and then only by private invitation, to see the collection.
No, he was very worried about vandalism. He only had a very small group of people, international and local, that would come, but he was extremely private. We were all sworn to secrecy.
He was very, very private about it. There was never to be any photos of it, and it was never to be talked about. So you didn't.
Mr. Mick died in September 2013, aged 97. It was his wish that the collection be gifted to the people of Australia. The Wollongong-based company he founded, Shin Investments, has donated items in his name to the Workshops Rail Museum in Queensland and the University of Wollongong.
Wow.
So yes, bit of a large layout, isn't it? When you see the video.
Amazing. You ready for a few questions?
Oh, why not? Let's see what we can do.
Have you seen the layout in person?
Unfortunately, I never saw it. I only ever heard about this after I went to the Portland convention in 2015 and saw Kermit doing this presentation. But basically, in Australia, in the model rail fraternity, there was probably only about 5 people, other than the people that worked on the layout for him, that actually saw it. And if you did see it, you had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that you wouldn't talk about it and you wouldn't take any photos of it. It was only after he passed away that it became public.
Wow. So, not related to the layout, but you mentioned some coal running through Wollongong. Where did that go from and to where?
So that came out of the mines out the back in central New South Wales and ran down to the power stations in Wollongong and out to the docks when it was shipped off. Australia has a good reputation for shipping coal all around the world. We've got some of the highest yield coal in Australia, the highest heat output of any other type of coal, and we still do that in Queensland.
Cool. Now, you said the layout was, when Craig arrived, taken to the tip.
Yep. Okay, so a tip to the Americans would be landfill or refuse. So basically, it all ended up in landfill.
That is not cool.
No, no.
There were lights in the tunnels. Was that just detail?
No, that was the occupancy detection system. So the occupancy detection used light sensors, basically light-dependent resistors that were
Uh-huh.
buried between the tracks. So, of course, when the train went into hidden storage and all underneath the layout, each of those sensors had to have its own light source above the sensor for it to work. So when you
Okay,
saw those shots of the hidden storage where it was going down in there and you saw all the lights, they were all above optical sensors for occupancy detection.
cool. Are there any notable pieces or parts of the collection you are fond of?
Probably the locos themselves. When you saw the video, when you saw the display cabinets of some of those locos, like I said, there's a whole bunch of crocodiles there, which are a pretty odd-looking European loco, and they were all brass gauge one made by Marklin or Merklin, as they
Uh-huh.
call it in Germany. But I would have to say that the rolling stock and the locos that he had were spectacular.
Do you know if all those locos were brass?
Every one of them was brass. There was no plastic in the collection at all. Even the rolling stock was all brass. So all of
Wow.
the tank cars and everything was brass. It was before the days of injection molded plastic models. Basically, anything of that detail was all either brass with lost wax castings or machined parts.
So where did all the engines and rolling stock come from?
They came from manufacturers like Sam Hongsa in Korea, Gem Models in Japan. He had a whole bunch of cab forwards there in two-rail O-scale, which were manufactured by Gem Models out of
Okay.
Japan, out of Tokyo. And this is before Kato or any of those brands had come about in Japan. The rest of them were Merklin, Roco, and the likes. There's actually a neat story about he went to Germany on holidays and he decided while he was away that he was going to come back and make an extension to the train, the tea house, and build a large HO layout. So he went to the Roco factory and basically said, "I'll buy one of everything that you make." So
Wow.
when you saw the shots in the video of the storage area downstairs with all the display cabinets, there were all these cardboard boxes around the outside. Well, that was all the Roco models that he bought on that trip to Europe. So
Oh wow. Was all the was the O scale layout true O scale like um, Proto 48 as we
yes,
have today?
yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then no scenery, no trees, no buildings.
Nope, he just wanted to see the trains running, and to him, scenery was an obstacle in the way. So he just wanted
Wow.
to sit back and watch the models. And as you can imagine, they're all brass, so the movement of the mechanisms on the side would have been spectacular. He didn't want any of that to be obscured by scenery, as he put it.
That was just amazing. Last question. We're
Yep.
running out of time. Who made the video?
Who made the video? The video was made professionally by his company after he passed away as a montage basically of what the collection was and as a record of his actual layout before it was removed and the building was sold and the collection dispersed. All the HO stuff ended up going to the University of Wollongong, and then all the Gauge 1 and O scale stuff ended up at the Ipswich Railway Museums up here in Queensland. But
Oh,
if you notice in that video, on the table in the middle of that collection room, there was a huge collection of wood planes. and that was another hobby of his, was collecting hand tools. So there was
Oh,
a huge collection of wood planes there that were again donated to another organisation. So
pretty neat. Well, Martin, thank you very, very much. That was just an amazing layout that I'm so sad that very few of us or people before us had the opportunity to see. And we'll be right back after we let Eric in.
no problems. I'm going to head back to bed, and I've got to get up in the morning and head to the Redlands Model Train Show to extol the virtues of Balloon Army Dakotars with them. So I shall bid you all a fond farewell, finish my cup of tea here, and head to bed.
See you soon.
Bye.
Welcome back. I'm Speed, not at the bottom of the helix today. We're waiting here for the Austin train show to open up so I can go in and buy a few things and maybe give a clinic or two. Our next presenter has been a model railroader since the early 1970s, but has enjoyed prototype modeling since 2000. His interests are focused on research and modeling railroads, industry, and the urban environment of the mid-1920s. He once owned a record store for 13 years and has hosted numerous radio shows with a focus on many types of music. Please welcome the worldwide famous Eric Hansmann.
Well, thank you. I wasn't expecting worldwide famous there. Thank you. And welcome everyone to another fun-filled NMRAx clinic. Many thanks to Speed for inviting me today. I've got quite a few examples here for backdating plastic freight car models, and they are all HO scale models, as that's what I work in, HO scale. Some of these are similar to other models available in other scales. So let's get going here. And yeah, I know this seems like an odd question. And you know, I've heard the reactions from so many people. Why would we even want to think about doing such a thing? Well, first off, there are many HO scale plastic models representing freight cars that are built in the teens and 20s. And it's easier now to model a moment from a century ago. The models will all need some work to best reflect the period practices. And secondly, if you model before 1953, these same freight cars might need similar updates, because many of those freight cars that were built in the teens and the 20s, they survived in operation and service into the late 40s and very early 50s, and some even beyond that. So let's take a look at a few. Now these boxcars were not USRA car designs. This Acura model actually is similar to Canadian prototypes that were built just before and after World War I. These reefers follow Fruit Grower Express prototypes and a few others that were built in the early 20s. There were 25,000 USRA double-sheath boxcars built in 1919 and assigned to 24 railroads. Here's another single-sheath boxcar that has similarities with Illinois Central and Milwaukee prototypes. There are other manufacturers producing models of earlier prototypes too, not just AccuRail. For instance, this Bowser Pennsylvania Railroad GS class all-steel gondola follows a design originally built in 1903. People often are amazed when I tell them that there were about 20,000 of these built, and many of them operated into the 50s and beyond in maintenance way service. Walthers produced the USRA 70-ton Milgon. 5,000 of these were built and assigned to 5 railroads in 1919, and through the 20s, thousands of near copies were built for the New York Central lines, the Reading, and the B&O. These are just a handful of plastic models that are available that can be used, that reflect prototypes from the teens and 20s that can be used on your layouts. Regulations spurred many changes on our prototypes. These 5 AAR regulations are key to understanding details for upgrading the models. All these models, they come with AB brake systems, all right? If we go to the bottom here, one of the first regulations was AB brakes required on all newly built freight cars starting in 1933, late 1933. That's just for newly built. This was the Depression. If you look through some of the build records of the 30s, new car construction went way down. Many railroads often rebuilt what they had. So in 1937, the AAR required that AB brakes be installed on all newly rebuilt freight cars because they wanted to change out of the K-brake system, all right? And then we had the arch bar truck ban in July 1940. And this is another key date that I get asked about this a lot. When were arch bar trucks banned? That's the date right there, July 1st, 1940. And then we have another date toward the end of World War II where wood running boards were outlawed on new cars. So after this point, new cars would have steel running boards like Apex or Morton style running boards on boxcars and covered hoppers because they were a new freight car at that time. And then the big one here, January 1st, 54, all K-brake systems, all cars with K-brake systems were banned from interchange. That was the drop dead date. Many of these dates, some of these dates have been pushed back many times, especially the arch bar truck ban and the K-brake ban. They were pushed back many times over the years for railroads to catch up, basically. Because these fleets were huge. You know, you just don't modify 20,000 cars like that. It takes a lot of time. And they needed time in order to upgrade and make the changes to the brake systems and such. Here's one of my favorite resources for inspiration. This is a great book published by the NMRA, and it's been reprinted a few times now. It features photos from the Robert Charles collection, and most of those photos were taken between 1945 and 1948. So there's quite a few older freight cars that are featured, and many of them actually have the earlier K-brake system components. A lot of the old freight cars, they were put into service for the war demands. You know, the railroads were stressed in order to meet the demands of the wartime effort. So there's 350 freight car images in this book. And yes, I took the time to tally up and make my own spreadsheet in order to share with you what I saw, what I found. So there's the different types of cars and what I found for the different years from photos just in this book. And these are only the photos where I could really tell that there was a K-brake system on the car. In some of the photos, I really couldn't discern that. So let's take a look at a few cars here, a few prototypes. Here's an Illinois Central boxcar from the Charles collection. We can see the K-brake system right here in the center of the car under the door. It's not three components like the AB system. This is just one component. The K-brake system, this is K connected, where the brake cylinder was connected to the air reservoir, and at the other end of the air reservoir was the valve, the operating valve. There was a different version too, and we'll get to that. Pennsylvania Railroad, their X-29 boxcar fleet, most of their cars were built in the 20s, so they originally had K brakes. Many of them had K disconnected. That's KD, otherwise known as split K brake systems, where the air reservoir and valve were separate from the brake cylinder. The brake cylinder is actually on the other side of this unit right here. And we'll see an example on a model coming up here soon. So that's two different types of K brake systems that were used. And the split K brake, they were very important, very common on gondolas that had drop doors, and also on hoppers, because you had very little space at the end of the hopper underneath the slope sheets for the brake components. Here's another photo here where we see the K brake system, a K connected system under this PFE reefer. We also see a new stencil for a new weight date, and we'll get into that here soon too. Another interesting detail for these earlier cars, the second grab iron wasn't required until 32, 33, right around that period. We see it here on the Penzi car that's been upgraded with a new door and the grab iron, but not the new brakes, compared to this PFE car where we have the K brakes and the original single grab above the left sill step. Tank cars had a lot of many of these had K brake systems, and they're very visible because of how well we can see under the car. A lot of them stand out. Some of them had the split K system too. Here's one of my favorite photos for weathering. This is Jack Delano photo from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress site, loc.gov. It's a treasure trove of great photos and information. And these photos you can download as large TIFF files. So you can zoom in to review all the details. And that's what I recommend, downloading the large TIFF file for your archive so that you can refer to it easily. Because sometimes it's a little difficult to find that needle in the Library of Congress haystack. So download good quality for your own archive so it's easy to find. We have a B&O M26A class boxcar right here in the foreground. We're going to take a look at that. See, we can zoom in very easily on these large photos. I did a little tweaking of this in Photoshop so that we could see it pretty clearly. And it's got part of the K brake system right down here. It also still has one handhold, one grab iron here above the left sill step, and it's got the original door. This is 1943, and I think it's in the original lettering. There's no B&O dome, no B&O herald over here on the right, and this is how the lettering was originally applied, the data presentation, when it was built in 26 or early 27. So this looks like it's a car that is in its original paint and lettering still, although very, very well worn. And here's your Illinois Central Gon that was right beside it. We can easily see the silhouette of the K-connected brake system underneath this gondola. And it's pretty beat up, although it's got the second grab on the left. It needs a little repair work done for this grab iron up here, and also the wood that's failing on the interior there. So I like to allow the prototype to guide my work with detailing and weathering models. So what do we do to our models? Here's some of the steps that I take. In many cases, Andrew's trucks would be used to replace whatever comes with the model. It's very easy to remove the one grab iron on the left side, and then, usually I replace the brake systems too. Here are a pair of Acura models that are pretty easy to upgrade. Both of them are in factory lettered, still with the factory lettering on it. But I removed the upper grab here on the Atlantic Coastline car. You can still see a ghost of it there. I also changed out the trucks and a couple other things too, and we'll get to that. On the Western Maryland car, I removed both grabs on the left and replaced one with a wire grab, and also replaced the trucks. So changing out the brake hardware is actually pretty easy. The lower car here, the underframe hasn't been updated yet. The underframe on all the Acura wood sheath box cars, whether it's the outside braced or the double sheath car, they're the same underframe. So it's the same processes that you would need to follow to upgrade either one. And basically, I fill in the holes where the air reservoir and the triple valve for the AB brake components go. I fill those in with some melted sprue material. Just melt a little sprue, pop it in there while it's still kind of plastic liquidy, and then let it dry and hit it with some plastic cement too. Now what's fascinating is that the application of the updated AB brake components is in the same spot as where the K brake was mounted. So the brake cylinder pad stays the same, and you could just mount your Tichy brake casting right on top of it. Now I also added some of the brake levers and brake rods on the upper model here. And let's see, on the Western Maryland, not on this one. So, the underframe upgrades really aren't that difficult. And once you do a couple, they really become pretty easy. And the nice thing about the K-brake system is, if I were going to detail the AB system here, there's a pipe that runs from the brake cylinder to the triple valve, and also two pipes that run from the triple valve over to the air cylinder. The K brake system, at least the connected version, you don't have to worry about that kind of piping to connect the parts. Here's a modified Acura underframe. I replaced the fish belly undersill with just some evergreen styrene, and added the K brake system. I also added the brake hangers, brake levers, and the air line that feeds to the brake cylinder, the brake components. Also on this Western Maryland car, I changed out the sill steps with A-line metal components. So, even if you go this far, once you start doing a few of these things, a lot of it falls right into place. And brake hangers, one of the great things about a lot of the brake hangers is that you can use 18-inch straight grabs for your brake hangers. So you don't even have to worry about, making exact brake hangers each time you want to install that. The Walthers USRA mill gun can also be backdated pretty easily. The KD brake system is the one major change. Now these models originally came with separate grab irons to install, and I haven't touched up the one up here yet. You can see basically, a lot of people don't like installing grab irons because there's so many. Well, on these mill guns, there's 8. There's 2 on each end, 2 on each side, and that's all you have to worry about installing. It's pretty easy. It's a good car to work on for your own upgrading skills. You need to change out the original trucks, and these are Acura Andrews trucks, which actually better represent the 70-ton version of the Andrews trucks. The underframe details, this is how it comes right out of the box here with the AB system components. I just took a sharp blade and removed the air cylinder and the triple valve, and I also removed the brake cylinder on this one too, but I kept the platform there, and put in the Tichy components and also some rods and some levers in order to reflect what was on the prototype. Again, this is a pretty simple upgrade if you want to backdate a USRA Milgon to an appearance that would probably be proper through World War II. The Bowser Pennsylvania GS Gone on the bottom would also need backdating, because as you know, the originals were built in 1903 with K brakes. Up above here, we've got a Finero and Camerlengo resin kit that is the same, that follows the same prototype. It's got the split K brake system here, as well as the Pennsy went a little complex on their brake levers here, so it's a little different from what you see on some other prototypes. I've yet to upgrade a Bowser model yet, so I can't show you an upgraded plastic one, but I will be following pretty much the same thing as what you see on the resin kit at the top. So the Bowser kits and the ready-to-run cars that they produce now, they would have the AB brake components on these pads. And the KD brake system, that's still the major change to these cars. So I've mentioned using the Tichy brake components, and they make both. They make the KC, K-connected brake component, as well as the KD disconnected or split K brake component. But it's also easy to make the split K out of the single casting. I just use a very sharp blade to cut carefully along this line. This is the where the air reservoir is connected to the brake cylinder as it is, and just carefully keep scoring a little bit as I slowly turn the casting, and careful not to bend the delicate piping parts on the back side here. So you can make your own as well. It's available either way through Tichy Train Group, or you could just get the one. Sometimes modelers just give me their spare parts because they don't use K brakes, and I tell them, are you sure you want to do this, because you really can use it. They're like, no, I don't need it. So I get some extra brake parts in the long run. So the KC, the KD, the disconnected, they're very helpful for working on hoppers, because hopper cars had the two components, mainly because there wasn't that much room deep under the slope sheet there. And here we have a Bowser GLA frame, and I've already installed a styrene pad here for the brake cylinder to go onto. And then the air reservoir is basically hung by a metal strap. It's not really connected to the frame directly, but the strap is how it's actually mounted onto the frame. The hoppers that are available, like the AccuRail USRA hopper and the Bowser GLA and H-Class models, they all have AB brake components. And if you really want to do this, they need to be changed out to the KD system. And both parts are mounted on the one end of the car. So it's really pretty easy. Once you start doing some of this, it falls into place. I originally used another piece of wire to join the brake cylinder and the air reservoir. I had to make this little bend because there's a post that comes down right here from the slope sheet. So I had to get around that. Here they are in place. Installation went pretty quickly. I trimmed the excess plastic, of course, after snapping the photograph. There are a couple. The one from the previous image, and then the next one I did. And I decided, since the connection back here is way back in the dark that I really didn't need to fuss over that and install it. So on many of my hoppers, I know I haven't installed that extra detail that's deep in the recesses underneath the slope sheet. And yes, of course, I would trim the excess styrene here from the strap. But that's basically how these parts were mounted on hopper cars. Here are the AccuRail mounts. And one thing I found was that the USRA hoppers, the brake cylinder was mounted differently than on the previous, on the GLA cars. It's mounted with the cylinder pointing toward the center of the car compared to the cylinder pointing toward the end sill of the car. So I had to figure out how to do that. And since it was going to be visible, I also included the airline connection to the back of the brake cylinder, but I just had it end back here at the slope sheet support. I didn't bother connecting it to the air cylinder. And I will point out one thing I did wrong here. I mounted the air cylinder upside down. We all make mistakes, right? That's how we learn. Here, these are mounted correctly, and these are incorrectly done. So I think I just left them be because they're really hard to notice. But I know it's there, and on subsequent models, I have updated my methods. Now, coal hoppers wore out quickly, and they were frequently rebuilt. Remember those regulation dates we were talking about? After January 1st, 1937, AB brakes were required on all newly rebuilt cars. So if you're modeling the late 40s, even some of the early 40s, I don't think you would need to worry about backdating too many hoppers. They took a beating, especially in coal service. Wet coal creates a little bit of acid that starts making the steel rust out. So cars were frequently rebuilt with new side sheets, and that's a pretty considerable rebuild. So they'd be getting new brakes after 1937. So if you're modeling the 1920 to 1940 span, well, maybe the brake updates are what you want to consider. Here's an AccuRail hopper, pretty much completed with the updates. I also added a train line along the side. You can see the brake cylinder mounted, pointing toward the center of the car. And again, here we have a USRA, AccuRail USRA car, and a Bowser GLA car, and the upgrades that I did for both. And again, I followed prototype photos. I let the prototype be my guide on a lot of this. So, you know, the brake cylinder, I've even got the brake lever under here. The Buffalo Creek and Gawley cars had a different kind of ladder than on other GLA hoppers or other early hoppers of that era. And so I did that too. And with the AccuRail car, I removed the visible plastic grab holds or hand holds, grab irons and hand holds, and replaced those with wire, as I did on the Bowser GLA hopper too. Many tank cars that were built in the teens and through the 20s, they'd all have K-brake systems, and many of them kept those into the 50s. Here's a great example. This is a builder's photo where we can see the K-brake system very clearly hanging off the center sill on this Roxana Petroleum car. And I say Roxana Petroleum, you see Shell, but the reporting marks were for the parent company, Roxana Petroleum. Shell was the brand name for their product. Now, many of these, this represents a AC&F Type 21 tank car, and Proto 2000 produced these in HO scale. So this is something where there's plenty of models out there, and if you want to backdate it, it's a pretty easy process. Here's my model with the original AB brakes installed. So we've got to remove a couple parts and then put in replacements. There's a close-up of the prototype photo. Notice this kind of hangs off of components that are attached to the center sill. It's not hanging off the bottom of the center sill, but there's like a wedge-shaped piece here and then an arm back here that the brake components are attached to on the prototype. And here's the Tichy casting installed in place. Remember, brake cylinder, air reservoir, and then the control valve back here. So this is a K-connected brake component. It fits easily in that space. And pretty visible, even though it's not painted in this photo here. Once it's painted, once this car is weathered, a lot of dust kicks up under here. So you would have, you'd be able to see that brake component pretty clearly on your layout. Another thing, many tank cars had arch bar trucks through the 20s too, and some had Andrews trucks. So refer to your photographs to make sure, to help that guide your work. That's something I always recommend to people. Use the prototype photos, let that guide your work. So everything we've covered so far has focused on physical hardware changes for our models in order to reflect the prototypes well. Another element to consider is the weigh data lettering. Freight cars were frequently weighed and the updated information stenciled accordingly. The journal boxes also, they were repacked annually, if not more frequently, and a stencil was applied above the right truck with those details. When I do these changes, I try to pick a new weigh date within a couple years before my modeling focus. This is also a way to see what date of some of the photos you're looking at are, the prototype photos. If it's got the weigh date can tell you that the photo was taken sometime in the months right before, right after that weigh date, but yet not too far out in time because it would need to be reweighed again. So freight car lettering is really a detail that stands out on many of our models. New cars, they're painted, stenciled, and then lightweighted. This one hasn't been weighted yet because the weight hasn't been stenciled. Once the work is done, this goes to the scale, it's weighted, and it's then the information, the data is added here, along with the month added to the weigh date. So on your data, you're going to have your weight. Later on, this is lightweight, and we'll see that in a moment. You're going to have your weigh location, and then the weigh date. A lot of people confuse this with a rebuild date. That's not necessarily the same. It might be, but it doesn't. There's not a direct correlation. And we'll go over some of that too. This is a great 1925 image from the Reading Railroad magazine. Remember this car from earlier? It's a great example of a freshly painted area in order to apply a new weight stencil. So the load limit, if it changes, or the lightweight, if the lightweight changes, the load limit changes too. When you add up these two numbers, it equals the capacity for the journals of the truck of this car. It doesn't equal the capacity up here. It equals what the journals have a capacity for. That's a very, very important issue. A lot of people think these two numbers equal the capacity of the car, and that's wrong. At the far end, there's also another paint out, and that's where the repack data was, the repack stencil goes. So how frequently were these cars reweighed? And there's data for this. It's published. It's published in almost every official railway equipment register. That's ORER. They're in the Code of Service Rules. And this is what I found in a 1943 ORER, which the NMRA has republished. That they may have copies in their company store. I haven't looked lately. They also republished, I believe, in 1954 ORER too. And I find these volumes to be very, very handy to help my modeling. Since I focus on an earlier time, I also have the 1925 and 1926 versions, among others. So we just can see what the schedule is that the AAR has dictated for the car service rules. And this is how these cars needed to be reweighed periodically in order to follow the rules. And if the car was 300 pounds or more different from the previous light weighting, then you would have to change the light weight and the load limit stencils. All right. If it didn't change, all that would change is the place and the date for the reweigh. Refrigerator cars were a little different. They could vary by about 500 pounds or more. But everything was on a schedule. And you can see wood cars, or cars with a lot of wood, they needed to be reweighed quicker after their build compared to the steel cars. That's because the wood would dry out and change the weight of the car. And this is important because railroads made money on shipping the weight of a load. Remember, they're in the business of making money. And they made money by the tare weight of what they were carrying. So the light weight of the car was always important. Here's what I did on a model. We saw this one earlier. This is a USRA boxcar, Mid-Atlantic coastline car. I painted a strip of decal paper. Whenever I decal cars, oftentimes there's a blank strip somewhere on the decal paper. I save that. I paint it with a brush or with my airbrush, some sort of car color, some basic color that I use for painting other cars. Mineral brown, mineral red, whatever. And then I use that in order to cover some of the stenciling for an upgrade on the data here. And all this is factory applied. And the original had the original lettering on this car reflected a 1919 data when the prototype was built. I model 1926. So this car would have been reweighed at least twice before my focal point of modeling. So I redid this. I added first off, I applied some gloss with a brush over this area. And then I added the red decal, the paint decal. And then on top of that, I added the 100 here, the location, and then the date. And yes, the date I think is 2 decals. The 5 is separate. You don't always find decals that fit exactly what you want to model. So you've got to piece some things together. And that's what I did here. And yes, I know it looks sloppy, but when you start looking at prototype photos, especially the reweigh information, you're going to find stuff that looks like this. It's not a straight line. Not all of it was redone. Things were done quickly to get this car back on the road. So this is something to remember. And it's once you start doing some of this, it comes together pretty easily. And you got to do both sides of the car, of course. So here's the same car under different lighting and exposures. This is how I had the car originally after weathering it and getting it into service. Then I realized, oh, I got to change this because this is for the new moment when it was built in 1919. So I changed that out. I changed the weigh information with the decal work that we went over previously. And WX is Waycross, Georgia. Railroads had a number of different scales, and you would need to find what was common for your railroad, because in many cases, railroads weighed their own cars. Not all cases, but in many. So predominantly, an ACL car, you would need an ACL scale in order to put on the proper weigh location there. And here's another method that I use. This model is freshly painted, freshly decaled, represents a USRA boxcar. This is a Tichy HO scale model. And this was originally lettered for Pennsylvania lines. But in 1924, Pennsylvania Railroad reorganized and absorbed Pennsylvania lines. And they went around and started quickly painting out lines on their cars. They didn't do the whole road name. They just painted out lines in order to bring the focus just to the core corporation. So I decaled, you could probably just barely see the shadow of the decals under the tape. I decaled that and I put gloss coat over it, and then I applied the tape. And then I shot this with a flat coat and started weathering. Now, why would I do this stuff with tape? It's because I wanted some of the original paint to be showing through, and I wanted the original decals to be brighter than what you see on the rest of the car, which would make it seem like new stenciling applied over a paint out area. And that's what I did here. And then, with wood sheath cars, boards were oftentimes replaced too. That's why I did it on the door. And then representing the paint over the Pennsylvania lines, over the lines portion of the road name there. So I did that with tape. And this is Tamiya masking tape. It works really nice, easy to cut and easy to apply, and just have to be very careful peeling it off so that you don't pull off the decals. I did put a gloss coat over the decals before applying the tape, and of course I let that dry, and that's key so that when you peel up the tape, you're not going to peel up the decals too. Here's an Accurel 36-foot boxcar with custom decals for mid-20s appearance. And I also covered the weigh data information with tape too. It's a little more subtle in this model than the Penzi car, but you can pretty well see that it stands out a little bit compared to the rest of the car. Here's a hopper. I did pretty much the same thing here, except I needed to add the LT stencil here for lightweight. And I did this because I've seen this on prototype photos. The AAR and the ARA started changing some of their lettering requirements in 1925. This was, they started requiring the lightweight out here in 1925. And in late 26, they started requiring things to be separated completely here with load limit added to the weigh data. So that's why this looks different from what you might be more accustomed to with later cars. I also added the repack stencil above the right truck here. And again, I apply some gloss with a brush, let it dry, and then I can add the decal. Once that's dry, I go over it with some gloss again before hitting it with some flat and then adding some more weathering. Now, sometimes when a car is weighed offline, that company doesn't necessarily have the same color paint handy for the paint out. So it's a different color. And you see this a lot on some modern cars. But it was happening way back in the 20s and teens too. So this is just another little detail that you can add to give your model just a little bit extra right there. And again, I used the extra decal strip that had been painted mineral brown and applied that as a separate decal, and then the stencil decals over top for the location and the date, and of course the different weight. And in my earlier era, since they didn't have load limit stencil, I didn't have to worry about changing both those numbers on this car. So that's, some of the key things for backdating some of your models, giving your models a little bit more personality and character. And a lot of it, you're basically following the prototype. It's one of those things that I always like to suggest is let the prototype be your guide. There are so many resources out there. The NMRA book is just one. Historical societies have published resources, lots of fleet books for their boxcars or hoppers. I know I've got books from the Western Maryland Historical Society and the B&O Historical Society that have a bunch of photos that I use for inspiration. There are many other online resources besides the Library of Congress too. The Barringer Library has a Flickr site that has thousands of photos. You could spend all week looking at photos on that site and still not see them all. There are ACNF builder photos there, as well as just tons of photos that were taken line side where you can see some freight cars and find some inspiration for your own work. So it's amazing. We have so much access now to all this stuff compared to when I started in 1970 as a modeler. It's right there, almost at your fingertips and easy to do. And as with many things with modeling, do an easy project first. Don't try something very difficult right off the bat. You'll get frustrated, you won't go back to it. Trust me, I've done that many times. Do something easy first 2-3 times, get accustomed to it as far as changing out the brake systems, things like that. Work on an Acura car, like I suggested. That's one of the easiest models to change. Share your work. That's a great way to learn too, and help others along. And always, always, always ask questions. I wouldn't be the modeler I am today if I didn't ask any questions along my journey. So I encourage you to do that too. And everything takes time. All these cars here that I built, they take time. Many of these updates, they're actually pretty easy. They go quickly, just need a little touch up and then weathering in order to get the car back on the rails and into operation. So go for it, try something different. And I think you'll enjoy things in the long run. So if you have any questions, get in touch with me. My email address is right there. I also have a blog with regular postings noted here at the bottom. And I hope you visit and learn something interesting. I've been doing that since 2010. And try to do at least 1 or 2 posts a month with something that I hope you find interesting. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the invite for NMRAx. And I guess it's question time, right, Speed?
Ready for some questions?
I am ready.
Let's start with the tough one first. For the paint out or patch, what is the weathering material and how is it sealed? And do you mask the patches to do them?
Well, as you saw with one of the boxcars, I decaled it first, and then after decaling, my steps for a freight car are paint, gloss, decal, gloss. And then after that, I'll apply the tape to whatever I want to protect. Then I do a flat coat, which gives the model tooth for weathering. I might weather some at that time or a lot before peeling away the tape to show that fresh stencil. Now, with cars where I do that after weathering, um, the paint patch represents like new paint. So
Hmm.
I'll spot gloss with a brush and some gloss, let that dry, then apply the decal, the color decal, then the stencil decal, hit it again with gloss so that it blends right in. And then I'll probably put some flat over that, but I'll try not to weather that spot much at all.
Okay.
Most of the weathering may be on the car already. So I'm just very careful to not cover up what I don't want to cover up.
Quick question about the prototype. Why did they reweigh the cars, and how much was the new number different?
Okay. Um, as I mentioned, railroads made money by the weights of what they're carrying in the cars. So you take the light weight of the car, and then with many cars, especially hoppers, you weigh it after it's loaded, you subtract the light weight from that overall weight, and you have the amount that the car is carrying, and that's what
Hmm.
you make money on. So a car needs to have a proper light weight in order to effectively make a proper dollar on it.
Correct.
So um, that's why they reweighed cars. And if a car is 300 pounds or more off of what the previous stencil is, then they would do the new stencil and add the new weight. They
Okay.
would
Now,
they would adjust the light weight and the load limit to reflect the total that's allowed by the journals on the car.
but did they expect cars to change that much over time? I mean, were they losing metal or wheels or brake
Um,
levers?
maybe not the first couple of ways, you know, maybe not the first one 30 months after they were built or 30 months after that, but after that, as a car ages, it may lose weight. It may also get new hardware, which would change the
Okay.
weight. You know, any sort of updates. As I mentioned, hopper cars, the side sheets, they wouldn't necessarily replace all the side sheets at once on some cars, just some of that. So that's new metal, you know, compared to
Okay.
what they took off.
Correct.
So there might be a difference in the weight there too. It's about doing business.
Yes. You mentioned several different kinds of trucks and brakes. Have you modeled all of them?
Um, I've modeled quite a few. I mainly do the K brake, whether it's connected or disconnected. Um, there's a lot of trucks available now, and even more are coming available as 3D printed uh, objects. So I use uh, I use Andrews trucks and arch bar trucks predominantly, where applicable to replicate what's underneath a prototype. I'll use Dolman 2-level trucks. There are some 40-ton trucks available through Tahoe Model Works
Hmm.
that I use too. You know, we tend to forget that you know, a lot of boxcars built in the teens were only 40-ton capacity. So the truck would be a little bit different under those moving
Correct.
forward. Um, so that's something that I pay attention to. I don't have a large layout, so the details I put into each car, they become very important to me.
Quick question here from Ralph. Why didn't they call them empty weight instead of lightweight, I guess?
I don't know. They've always been lightweight since the Master Car Builders Association, you know, began requiring the lettering on the cars back before the ARA and the AAR were formed.
Cool. Um, when you date your cars, do you heavily weather them to the proto photos?
I do predominantly. I think for many of us, especially modeling the steam era, I don't think we weather our cars enough.
Okay.
Um, industrial cities were smoky. There was a lot of
Hmm.
soot. There was coal burning in home furnaces as well as factories. There was coal burning in most steam locomotives, especially, you know, in the Midwest and the West and the East and the South. I lived in Nashville for several years, 5 years, and I saw photos of Nashville from the 30s and 40s, and it was a pretty smoky city. And we don't think of Nashville as a smoky city. When we say smoky city, we think of Pittsburgh. We think of Buffalo, Cleveland. We think of those cities there with major industries. But pollution was a problem all over America. And I don't think we represent that grit and soot as much as we should.
Okay, what would be the best resource for a newbie to learn about brakes? Where would you send someone like me?
Well, it depends on what you're modeling. What era you're modeling. Mainly what era. There are car builder dictionaries that have been published down through the years, and those are great resources. Someone gave me one from 1937 that is just a compendium of companies that are selling hardware, different kind of hardware, doors, brakes, latches, trucks, couplers, spring packages, bolsters, you name it. It's in those things. So a car builder dictionary, I think there was one from the 30s or 40s reprinted that comes up every now and then that's a little less pricey than a real one.
Okay, here's one. Tips on weathering wood, sided, or even older steel cars.
Oh, that's a whole nother clinic.
So let's hold that question then for the future clinic. How big is your mid-1920s freight car fleet, and how many are plastic kits?
I've got about 165 or 170 cars, and I'd say 65 to 70 are plastic kits or plastic ready to run.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last question, what is currently on your workbench?
I've been working on a Finero and Camerlengo Illinois Central single sheath, door and a half automobile boxcar. And I'm finishing up installing etched metal ladders on that so that it's ready for the paint shop.
Wow. Oh, I have a question. It looks like you install these plastic and copper things into a car, and then you go later and paint them. How do you get the paintbrush back in there, or do you paint them all with the same kind of paint, regardless of what kind of material it is?
I usually prime a car before putting the car color on it. So, and there's some things that I don't necessarily paint right away or install in the car before it goes to the paint shop. There are uncoupling levers that are different from some that are called Karmer levers.
Okay.
And I try to install those after a car is painted, and I'll paint those separately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much. That
Thank you.
Quite insightful, and maybe I'll attempt something like that soon.
You know where to find me.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Speed.
Brad, back to you for our next clinic. Come after the break. Welcome back for the third part of NMRAx here in August. I'm Speed. I'm not at the bottom of the helix. I'm sitting outside in the waiting room for the Austin train show, which I will run to right after this. Today we have a two-part clinic. First time we've ever done that. And so let me introduce our first clinician, fascinated by trains from the age of 6 and active model railroader for 40 plus years. His primary hobby focuses on building modular benchwork and teaching prototype-based operations, primarily timetable and train order style operations, and he's also the co-creator of the Operations Roadshow layout and teaching program. So please welcome today with us, John Young.
Thank you, Speed. Uh, that was a nice introduction. I am one of the co-builders of the Operations Roadshow. We've made a number of trips to national conventions, uh, teaching timetable and train order. We decided to retire that layout back in 2018. The layout had gotten old, and so had the owners of the layout, and thought we were out of the operations teaching business. But Gordy Robinson uh, liked the idea and wanted to re-establish it. And for the St. Louis convention, he brought forward that idea. Um, the Operations Roadshow, being shown here at one of our home layout operating sessions with our North Central Region uh, Board of Directors, had done 8 different national conventions where we gave clinics. We had built a dedicated layout to doing this and moved it around quite a bit. Here we're at our last convention in Kansas City, and you can see what we would do. We would have 2-man crews. We'd send a docent with them to help guide them along the layout. In this picture, you can see our chief dispatcher, Jeff Ryman, and my wife, Cindy Young, who is our operator, and how we would conduct a session. Groups of guys working their way around the layout. Uh, it was a rather well, it still is a rather large layout, 400-foot main line, 8 primary cities, but with a lot of distance between those towns so that you'd have the idea of isolation. Uh, I've always enjoyed teaching operations. I started out my career as a teacher, got misguided into manufacturing for a number of years. So let's take a look at what we ended up doing here. This is the Operations Roadshow layout. Uh, you can see the general size of it, but this had to morph into something else to continue on. And so we did St. Louis with a very limited layout, and it went well enough that the Free-moN folks decided to take on the project with us. And this is the layout we presented in Dallas, Texas back in 2013 or 2023. Roughly speaking, it's a layout of about 54 feet by 66 feet. I have a 320-foot main line on it. I volunteered to build one of the staging yards that would be needed for the layout. Uh, Unfortunately, the gentleman that was going to build the second staging yard had to pass on it about 10 weeks before the convention. So Lee Calkins, our leader on setting up the layout, asked me to produce not one but 2 of the staging yards. So my requirements were this all had to fit in my minivan with 3 people traveling in it with us. Modules for me had to be lightweight. I'm 70 years old and I don't lug things around like I used to do. I wanted the legs to be permanently attached to the modules themselves. I wanted them to sit on casters so they were easy to move into position. And since I don't crawl around on floors that well anymore, the levelers had to be some system that could be adjusted from a standing position. This is an illustration of what I suggested to Lee initially for the one staging yard I was going to make. It's 7 tracks. It has a run-through track in the middle, a double ladder to it. I was not sure what would be fed beyond it as far as if there'd be any turning facilities or a return loop, but it ended up with a return loop. After Lee made his request to me, this is what it ended up being. When he made the request, I had one ladder track had been built, one body track had been built. I built the second ladder to match the first and then built yet another body track. So this is what we had for the fiddle yards for both ends of that layout. The track center lines on this are 1.5 inches, so it was easier to reach in and manipulate cars to be loading them. Now, these yards are exclusively to be used as staging yards. They're not intended to be classification yards or yards of service, say industries in any other way. They are to stage full trains to be used on the layout. Here's a bit of the construction. I use very lightweight materials. 5.2 millimeter Luan for the majority of the materials. Only the end plates are 3/4 inch plywood. I like the Luan in a vertical position is very stable. Primarily, everything is glued together. The only thing that gets nailed together are the 3/4 inch end plates to the side plates. You'll notice the curve module I have to the side here. I included that to give better illustration. Now we're looking at the top of both of these modules. I am creating 6-sided boxes with longitudinal and lateral support beams. I'm trying to support the upper deck with no more than a 1-foot span from the support area around it because it is so thin a material. The 5.2 millimeter materials I've used are intended as floor underlayment. So generally they don't have a very good strength in their thickness. But like I said, set on edge, they are quite strong. They create a very lightweight box, and it is solid. It resists twisting, racking very, very well. Personally, I have built, I think, roughly 80 modules in my 40 years in the hobby. I've built N-track modules that were the standard construction method in 1980 of 3/4 inch plywood and 1/2 inch plywood decking. They were quite heavy. I was a younger man. I could still whip them around pretty well back then, but it's an unreasonable amount of weight, in my opinion, at this point in time. So I have gone this way for construction. I got the idea from the Sipping and Switching Society of North Carolina. They've been using this kind of construction now, so well over 30 years, and they've had a lot of success with it. And so that's the system I have followed along with. It's a little closer detail to one of the boxes. You'll notice that I don't depend on just the butt joint being glued together. I also put reinforcing blocks in all of the butt joints and anywhere there's a connection. That's very important to making this kind of construction work. You'll also notice in the middle of this picture, there's another 3/4 inch piece of plywood that is incorporated inside the box itself. This is the support structure for the hinges I'm going to use to hang the legs to the module. It's very necessary to have this much meat to meet that need. They are also, the legs are not at the ends of the modules. I've set them back a bit to make it easier to reach around and hook up wires and get clamps in there so they're not interfering with any of the leg structure. The modules themselves are 15 inches wide, 5 feet long. So this setback roughly 10 inches from the end still allows the legs to swing up and be completely underneath the module and out of the way in transport. On the end of this module, you'll also see that there's a hole and also a slot. Since I'm painting the ends of these, and I've had the experience of modules sticking after being connected for quite a while, I left myself a slot where I could slide a flat screwdriver up in there and break the adhesion between the two modules. The hole you see there is an alignment pin. There'll be an aluminum piece of rodding goes through there and permanently attached so that it aligns to the module next to it in the module set. When I get to clamping, to get the final surfaces on, I don't have clamps big enough, but I do have lots of bottles of water that I can spread across that upper surface and get everything to set up. The one criticism I have of this construction system is, since everything has to glue, it gets spread over too many days. I've built modules of this size, and I can do it in a morning. Just cut everything out and nail them together. Gluing, you have to give the glue enough time to actually be finished and completely set. There might be another detail that you can notice here, that the module box, I do not try to cut the upper and lower deck pieces to perfect alignment. I make them oversized, I glue everything together, and then I go back over them with a router to get the final shape and edging on them. It's much faster, it gives a much cleaner look to the whole operation. We have the throat design here. We're working with Atlas Code 55 track. Number 7s are the minimum mainline switches allowed in the Free-moN standards, so that's what I used to build this yard. With the 1.5-inch track spacing, I found that you had to space the individual turnouts with a 3-inch piece of track to get that proper spacing. I hadn't built in this size and in this scale very much yet, so that distance did kind of surprise me. In the other picture, you'll see what the end plates look like. I painted most of the module with latex paint. Everything was primed and then it was finished painted afterwards. But the end plates I spray painted with flat black paint. I thought that would have less chance of getting an adhesive type surface. You'll notice that I used oversized slide switches as the turnout controls. I try to keep things simple, and since you're going to be close to the tracks anyway, I personally didn't feel there was a need for a tortoise type switch machine at all. So this is the method I used. Here's a little bit better detail of it. The button there was an idea I got off of Sean Franklin in St. Louis. He had very much smaller slide switches to fit scenically in his layout, but I went to a larger switch so it'd be more easily manipulated without too much effort. Connection is just a piece of bent wire. This is a short look at what the module looks like standing independently. You can see how narrow the legs are on it. This is a little illustration of the builder, and you can see the hinges and the construction of the legs to a certain extent. To get the leveling feature I needed, I constructed these legs in such a way they attach to the hinge. That block of wood has a 7/8 inch dowel in it that is center drilled to accept a threaded nut, and then into that I glued a piece of 1/4 inch bolt material that's 6 inches long. The wooden leg itself also has a threaded nut in it, and that wraps up on the 6-inch threaded rod, giving me at least 4 inches of elevation change I could put into it. On the right-hand picture, you can see one little silver screw there in that black rod. That's holding a 10-inch long piece of aluminum tubing there to help give guidance to the 7/8 inch wooden rod, keep it from wobbling around very much. Here's the casters on the end. They're just cheap furniture casters, the least expensive one I could find on Amazon that had a 2-inch wheel. You might also notice there that there's a silver part right at them. I added that aluminum tubing to it at the end of the wooden rods to keep the bolt from blowing through the wood itself. That just helps reinforce that wood. My wiring would be crude by certain people's standards, but I have been resistant to ever using screw terminals under a module. Transportation and screw terminals do not seem to be a good combination in my experience, so I would rather hardwire it and check every wire as I connect it so I know it's right. You can also see in the right-hand picture, a friend of mine 3D printed these holders for a double female connector to carry the DCC bus. And I put them on a red block so they're easier to identify as you're making the connections. In the left-hand picture, you can see my unfinished wiring for the slide switches to control the frogs. If I ever get the modules back from the guy who's holding on to them right now, I will complete that task. You'll see this is a pair of modules being racked up, ready to ship to Evanston. You can see some of the details of the legs and some of the wiring here in the picture. And then here is a picture of the racking system idea I stole from the ModuTrack people up in northern Chicago. They have built a number of identical racks that they attach to their modules with that uh, hand knob there. It's just a quarter 20 connector. And they stack their modules sometimes 6 high to transport. Each of these end plates has a keying system, so the modules sit firmly on top of one another, and then once they have a stack pulled together, they loop a ratchet tie down between the handles you see and just snug it all down so it's in a uniform block. To that idea, I added having casters on the bottom of the lower block of modules. That way I can more easily move them around when I'm at a module site, setup site. Uh, for this yard, it was necessary to face the two modules together. You wouldn't want to do that with a scenic module, but with this yard that will never have scenery on it, that was safe for me to do. It cut down on the overall height of the stack and made it possible for me to slip them in my personal minivan to transform them down to Dallas. Took this picture outside of my construction garage to get an idea of what the 4 modules look like all set up together. The layout stands on those thin legs and is relatively stable. But the legs themselves turned out to be one of the negative learning things that came out of this construction technique. Like I said, I've built a number of modules and I have built all sorts of leg systems along the way. Some of them have been very awkward to attach. Some have been hugely too heavy for the application. Uh, this worked, and it worked well, and worked the way it designed, but it wasn't as stable as I'd have liked it to been. And I think the next permutation of this, I am going to cross connect the adjacent modules on each position so they don't have the side to side movement that this system seems to offer. I think they're steady enough end to end to keep from being a problem, but they just skipped around too badly. Um, this is our setup in Dallas and the layouts stage for the next operating session. Uh, it was easy to fill this yard. It's got a number of tracks in the yard that let you just get the cars on the track. You'll also notice to the left side of this picture, since this was an operations-based layout, every one of these trains was named in some way and had a destination. Those cards leaning against them is the designation for that particular train before it leaves. Here is how the One of these yards was used in the Evanston setup, loaded up with passenger trains. So thank you. I had a number of learnings from building these particular modules. This was the first time I actually used the lightweight techniques that I'd been looking at for a number of years. And I am quite pleased with the way they came out. Um, I think the openings I left have been adequate in them. The top decking concerns me a little bit. I'm not sure that it would survive remaining flat after you put a lot of scenery material on top of it. So I think in my future construction, I'll build the boxes the same way, but I'm going to plan on putting a half-inch or three-quarter-inch piece of plywood as the sub row bed down before I put the track on. I think that would remain stable no matter what happens to the top deck of the module itself. I mentioned the legs as being less than what I'd hoped they would be. The Modutrack people in Chicago have a different leg system where they have a construction type that they use that same knob just to clamp the leg in place. And I'm going to experiment with that and see if that better serves needs of these kind of layouts. So, Steve, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I'm not going to introduce myself. There might be a slide with some information. Um, so if G4 ever sees this video, I'm going to give him a run for his money because you're about to see 80 slides in a few seconds. So here's the yard that I built. Next page. Who am I? A Namibian living in the bottom of the helix, except for today. And I'm also the IT manager in the NMRAx scheduler. Today we're discussing how we build our separate yards, plenty of photos, the why, the ideas, the plan, the execution, and maybe a few tips or tricks and a few things you should not do. Why did I build this? Well, the Operations Roadshow, as John explained, had volunteers and modules, and then the modules retired. So 2022, they got Free-moN in to build them a layout to do Operations Roadshow, and in 2023, they asked Free-moN in again, but there was not going to be enough yards to operate in and out of. So I was somehow voluntold to build a yard. And even though I vehemently protested, at some point the Amazon and the brown boxes just kept piling up on my front door, and all the turnouts and track and parts just started showing up. So what kind of yard do you build? Because we do want a classification yard, but shall we go for something like this that needs about $12,000 in turnouts, or maybe something more recent, the Englewood yard in Houston, or do I just opt for the yard that's currently in my home country, right by what we call Independence Avenue in Windhoek? So the final track plan ended up being looking like this, where different to a staging yard, you need a yard lead that is long enough to pull a length of cars out of your yard. It was designed so that if we do split it in the middle, as the green line shows, that we could park it at the end of Free-moN layout and then show or use it as a staging yard. Now, here's the hiccup. Where these two tracks end on the left side and the right side, a normal Free-moN would think, oh, he has double mainline track there. So how about we just use that as double mainline track? So as Lee will explain to you, we have many discussions on why that is not an arrival or departure track. That is the lead for the yard. So um, it is built so that if we add more modules in the middle, the straight sections, then we just need another double mainline module to extend the lead. So before we go there, I need to show you that the system grew by adding another little module on the left side in order to go to another yard that was going to be in modeling the Galveston Santa Fe yard. And so the gentleman there needed a lead as well. So if we zoom in a little bit, the only important part is the purple and yellow part here, where you can see the ladders and then little stubby track there was intended for caboose, and now today it's a field track. And on the top right hand side in the orange and green, you'll see the 9 places where we can park engines in an engine facility. So the idea is here, if you look at the 6S number at the bottom left, that's where the main line comes in. Then you ignore that crossover there. That has a special purpose. I'll tell you a bit in a second. And then the next turnout is for you to enter the yard either as the arrival or when you leave as departure. And of course, there's 2 tracks, so you need to be able to get to both of them, and therefore the 2 crossovers there. Now, back to the one on the left. That crossover is for anybody who builds their train in the yard. We always have these people that want to build 200-car trains, and so if they set it up in this yard, how do they leave the yard if they don't have a way to escape? So that's the only purpose of that crossover on the left side, and the same thing happens on the green module on the far right. So you'll notice that the ladder has a name to it. All the tracks are actually named to everybody who invested in this project. I call them shareholders. So that was the final plan. So here we go. The builder, Jeff Reichel, offered to build these for us for a small fee, cabinet grade plywood, and build them into boxes like this so they can take a 2-inch piece of foam with the cross members simply helping to keep the long straight edges together, and then the thick pieces on the left and the far right to be able to stand the clamping that we do between modules. Why did I pick 18 by 50 inches? Because any civilian car in this country will take a 18 by 50, even if you stack another one on top of it and you have the 1.5 inch plywood with the bolts to keep them slightly separated from each other. So there's the first 6 modules for the yard being built. You'll notice that we have these pins, which is fairly expensive, but they match the modules perfectly together each and every time. And then the other 2 sets of holes are for the bolts to connect them. So there I have all of them connected, and it's strong enough that you could actually lift it up in the middle. I didn't do that for too long because I was worried about that center part there. So the bolt itself, once you put the foam on, you got to get that foam cut in both directions. And once you have it down, you'll see the second part, the foam is a little higher. We deliberately did not make the height 2 inches. We made it 1.85 so that we have to cut the foam off because foam does not come in a standard height. So I had to invent a little bandsaw, bow saw thing with a hot wire in it, so I could cut the foam this way. And one of the lessons is don't ever stop in the middle of this when your wire is hot. So once you have them all glued together, you can put some paint on the sides. You can put paint on top as well. That was not the smartest idea, but at least we used the Texas sun to keep that dry for us. Okay, on top of the wooden edges on the end plates, we used these little laser cut MDF pieces to give us the height, and then I made a set of PC boards to solder the rail to. Now, lesson learned, do not use MDF because it will soak up humidity and expand. So that's how the PC boards come. For anybody who's interested, I order these in bulk so that we save on shipping, and then I forward them on to you at cost. You just pay the $4 shipping and handling to get your own few PC boards. So once you glue them down, you need to make sure they go perfectly flattened down. So use some weights and some spacers underneath, and then you can see the final product there on the bottom right. So this project is not done by me alone. I had at least 9 or 10 people helping, directly and indirectly, and so you can see how we employed people to help build this thing. And here is the first 4 modules, and then 3 more for some future project that we'll do another clinic on. Came later. You also need to store it somewhere, so I had to install some shelving in my garage to take this, because I already have a 2-car garage layout above this 2-car garage, and there's no room there for modules, so modules had to go in the garage. This is how we glued the foam to the wood with some good old XP and AT computers. You also need to cut a hole in the foam to get access to that knob. Otherwise, you only do it with 2 fingers, which is not enough. I eventually would use a drill, electric drill, and a bolt instead of the hand knobs. Then comes the time when you need to glue the cork on. And thank you to David and Tom for showing up to help here. Cork needs weight, so you got to weigh this all down, wait for it to dry. Some more cork, cutting the pieces that forms the yard. Of course, the main line has to be slightly higher as well, so that's also taken care of. And then how do we know where the track goes? Well, I printed all the interfaces 1-to-1 so that so we could mark them straight on the places they needed to go. Now, of course, it's not perfect to the NRL drawings we made, and that's okay, because where in the world do you get perfectly straight track? So as life goes on, you always have to add something more. You can see the Y that David Hager was building for the Galveston yard, and he needed a yard lead, so I decided to use a 7th module to give him a lead in that double section of the Y, and then we would just have to cross over for the main to go to the single track on his far right hand side. So that's the crossover that you see there. Okay, once the cork is in, I do not use the beveled cork because I think it's just a little expensive. So we just cut it straight, and then we just added some Lowe's play sand to cover up the corners. So nothing gets done if you don't eat. So thank you to my wife for helping us out here. Here's some photos on how we built this, how we spaced it up, assembled it. There's the whole yard with half the cork not in yet in my driveway. John mentioned the 1.5 inches, how you have to extend it. In Free-moN, the double main line actually has to be 1 1/8 of an inch. So you have to cut some track on the turnouts to make this happen. So that was a lesson learned. Did not expect that to happen, but we managed. Here's how we soldered to the end. Then we started building the ladder, and of course you have a big project and not a lot of space, and you can't get all 7 modules together at the same time. So sometimes you have to revert back a little bit. So there's more photos of the ladder. Then the cork is not always the same thickness, and neither is the foam underneath. So we had to use some putty to smooth out the differences and make sure that it's level when you put the rail on. Of course, all the rail needs electricity, so these PC boards were also designed to have little holes in them, so we could solder wires to it, or bring the wire over the middle tie there, as you can see, to bring electricity to the track. To isolate them, initially I used the plastic rail joiners, but at some point they just look ugly and it's hard to slide a tie underneath, so eventually we removed all of them and just left a small gap, while knowing that the track is nicely glued down with the ballast. All my turnouts I like to have under eventual dispatch control or select a route. I only want to say go to track 3, and I want all the turnouts to align, which means you need some form of electricity to help you. So I install servos on the edge of the modules, which you'll see in the next few slides. So that's how we mark where the throw bar needs to be connected by a piano wire. And so imprint on the side of the module with the servo, then we cut a hole in there so that the foam holds the servo, as you can see over here. Now, eventually I discovered that I did not have to cut that bigger slot at the top. I just need a piece for the wire to go down to the servo, because the servo is far enough down that the wire going to the servo is the spring that you need, not to push too hard into the turnout. So then you take a drill, make it all the way there, and then you just simply use coffee stirrers to push them into each other to get you the length. And there you can see the spring in the servo. The servo sits on the wood at the bottom, and the foam is neatly holding it in place while the servo wire goes into another groove there that's now being collapsed by the pressure to go underneath the module. Okay, so there's a bunch of them installed and almost ready to test it out. So of course you have the other ladder as well, and then there was a problem with the height of the arrival and departure track, so we had to pull some foam up, cork up, and redo most of that. I had a few inspectors, I had a few people to help, and so it always helps if you know people that know more than you do, and they can come offer a third eye or a fourth eye to make sure the work is done right. So I use these little pins to keep the track in place while the glue is drying, um, or before we put the glue in, so that when you put the weights on, the track doesn't move. So here we have some cars being rolled across the edges and along the turnouts. And I always like to flick a car the long way into a turnout to make sure it goes smoothly. And if it does derail, then we're not done yet. So I love uncoupling magnets. We always keep the trip pins, or the brake hoses, I think is what you call them. So I made this little laser cut guide so I can put a Dremel tool with a offset gadget installed into it, so you can get the little recess part so that the magnets will sit perfectly there. I used to buy all the rectangular magnets I could find from Radio Shack, but since there are no more, we discovered these neodymium ones that you can get on Amazon, and the long way they do the same thing. Now, if you bring a car with pure metal wheels, your car's going to stay there. These magnets will definitely grab the car and keep it hostage. So, and then I always like to have rear railers before they go into, or when they come out of turnouts, so the rear railer would then sit right in the middle of the magnet. So I just have to color that one tie in yellow to indicate where the uncoupler is. Okay, we need some weights to glue things down. So David brought some bricks over. So you might see a few more bricks in the next few slides, or some other weights, metal blocks, or cylindrical spindles and motors to help. Even solder is a good weight. Um, Weathered all the track by spraying on this Krylon camouflage brown paint. Interesting to note that the color of the paint is only written either on top or below the barcode. There's nothing else on the bottle that tells you the color. Maybe the lid. So laser cut MDF for spacing all these things to keep them at some known spacing. This is what the wires look like underneath. It is not the Free-moN spec to have Ethernet or telephone wire carry your current, but since this is only going a little bit, I'm not too worried that we're gonna overheat a wire or something. There's also not 10 trains running at the same time into a classification yard. You can see the clamps there on the other side. That just helps you keep the thing perfectly level. If you're already overheated in the Texas sun and your fingers can't grab the knobs there to do the best job. So here's the straight tracks, showing how we built those. Pin them down after you put the glue on, and then find the weights to cut them up. Now, when we get to the legs, these are 3/4 inch electrical conduit, and then I am not a fan of that tool. So I had to beg a friend to come over and cut those for me and grind them smooth, because the regular conduit is a little cheaper if you buy it in 10 feet sections, and we only needed, I believe, 45 inches. So when we use these leg holders, that you're supposed to use these tiny little screws to clamp them down, well, they do not work at all. So what we decided to do is 3D print the parts with the top capped, and so that you can adjust the thing at the bottom, which is not preferred either. And that little gadget there that was invented by somebody gave me great trouble. So for the 2024 Evanston event, I printed some rubbery 3D prints that would clip over the bolt there, and then it's a lot easier to make sure that the plastic part underneath the bolt doesn't leave the system while you're traveling. So here's a photo of the mirror, because when you bring the left side to the right side, I thought that would be a cool artistic thing. You just need to crop it a little better. I also wanted to show the tools that we use. So solder iron, all the wires, stripping, tweezers, sharp blades, all the parts that we needed, the magnet cutting tools at the top, and of course the glue and the alcohol in the bottle there, top left. Here's a few more tools: flashlight, some paint, Scissors always useful. Do not overuse a Sharpie because when you put alcohol on it, it runs. So I actually have some track on my TX number layout that's fairly pink because I used a red Sharpie to indicate where I wanted the track. So don't do that again. Okay, so when it came time to 3D print all these leg things, we had 13 3D printers running over the last 39 days before the convention. So thank you to all those who were willing to help. So here's the leg holders. You can see the top is capped so that the leg doesn't go further than it should. Maybe I need to insert a pin through the hole and through the leg so they don't fall out, because I claim gravity is how we assemble this thing. And if you pick the module up, the legs will just drop out. So you got to grab the legs and then pick the module up. There's the what I call the ankles, and then the little parts to the left is what clicks over the feet as well. So the engine terminal, we decided fairly late that, hey, maybe we can park 9 sets of engines there and turn their power on and off. So since we had a bit of time, we decided to do that. There's another view of it. Um, Re-railers for a road to cross the yard here on one of the straight sections. There's the wires on one of the ladders. You can see all the green wires are the frogs, and all the other wires are color coded in sequence so that when you put the blue set, then the orange set, then the green set, and the brown set, you know you're doing track 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's all the track in and glue down. Put it back into the driveway so we could run some trains over it. Different view of it. That road that I said would go over the re-railers was done by using dust control, which is some patch and repair compound. Here's the road when it cracks the next day. The cool thing about this dust control is you squirt water on it and you smooth it out again, and you can reshape it. So until you paint it, you can keep changing it. Really cool feature. The underside needs circuit breakers and frog juicers. And note about the frog juicers, they trip a little late. So the circuit breaker goes first, and then the frog juicer loses power, and then it forgets what it was supposed to do. So eventually we had to move all the frog juicers straight to the DCC bus. Here's the straight tracks, straight module, just a simple connection to the circuit breaker. And bottom left here is where we plug the servos into the MQ Trains 16-channel servo controller. That will be another clinic. The power, if you buy the real power pole ones, you can certainly invest into the lower cost knockoffs. What you need to know is that even though those will plug into each other electrically, they will not join by sliding them on top of or next to each other. So if you pick one, stick to it. Don't mix and match. Here's the underbuilt of the yard ladder. Here's another photo of the straight track. And now the Texas heat has become so unbearable that my wife allowed me to work in the dining room, which you'll see a photo of later. A few more people helping. That's Jeff from Plano. Here's where we put all the servos in for the yard, connecting their piano wires. 3D printed the place where you plug the throttle in, because we just use a 2-to-1 LocoNet connector. Then clamp call it a template, so we know where to drill the big hole, and then laser cut the fascia so that the screw holes and everything is perfectly aligned for you to screw in the little plastic thing for the 2-to-1 connector to click in behind it. So I call it the invasion. So now I was occupying the dining room, the front entrance of the house, and almost 3/4 of my wife's hobby room. So if you came to visit, you would have to come in the front door, slide in, close the door, and duck under, or walk around the house and enter through the garage. There's the another view of it, with some of the ballasts being done. Here's some more tools for the plastic printed parts, voltmeter, drills, solder iron, lights. So I call these the indoor tools. The others were used outside. We had to do some scenery because a yard is not a yard if it has no scenery. Now, of course, this yard has almost no scenery, but at least we put a few roads in and a building or two, a few cars. I had to have some people come over and test it, so some people flew in from Massachusetts to come help. Thank you, John. There is a few buildings that we added, getting some of the scenery done. Now, most people think that this is Africa. It could just as well be, but it's called the Murphy Yard because that's where this was built and designed. So what we did not cover today will be a future clinic is MQTT that run this whole thing. MQ trains the hardware we use in the software, the pages, the HTML, JavaScript to design and show these panels, which you touch on a tablet, the electronics that run this below, and the E24 version of the same yard, which had more ballast and the better feet at the bottom. So I do want to say thank you to all these people who made it possible and at least a lot of fun. So here we go. Greg, Srini, Chris, David and David, Paul, Jeff, Tom, Michelle, who even helped painted some of those early modules, Robert, Eric, and Jeff. So now there's a few more slides to show you the final at the convention in 2023. And here's I think it was the green module on the map, and then on to the next one. That little tower there was apparently told that that is way out of date or out of location. So we will move that to someone else's module. The straight parts. For some reason, there were no cars in the layout when I took the photo, so maybe they didn't use the yard at all. There's the caboose track, and then on to the final part. And then we had another crossover to maintain the main line to go over to David's Y on the further side there. And I think that is the last slide. So to do this, plan early, do the weather, due to weather and the space you got, start early, yes, very early, ask for help, it does exist, buy extra parts, mistake happens, don't stray, rabbits have their own holes, test often, bugs that you see sooner gets fixed quicker. And do not do this, don't mix and match those connectors, as you can see they don't sit all that well. Don't make a mess on top of your electronics because you got to clean that up. Take care of the weather. Don't do this in a rainstorm. On the top right, do not spray paint onto the pink foam. It eats into it. And do not leave anything that's really hot like a solder iron just on a module without its stand. That was my lessons learned. And if there's any questions, now would be a good time to ask them. And I will stop the share. Oops, Brad, that might have given you a black screen. Stop the screen share. So John, I do not see any questions. I do put module scenery to scenery. Yes. So my modules were mounted face to face or scenery to scenery and then screwed with black end plates on there. Any questions from you, John?
Can I make you some suggestions?
Sure.
Before you start drilling holes in your mounts for your legs, experiment with using magnets to hold the leg up inside there.
Cool.
I have built some modules since then that now my wooden legs are lighter than what your conduit legs are, but I found some 10-pound magnets that would hold those legs against a quarter-inch lag bolt very adequately.
Oh, cool. Cool.
It's good enough to pick the module up and move them around and keep them in there, but it's not that difficult to pull them out.
Pull them out. Thank you. That's certainly something I would just do. Don't even experiment.
But,
Cool.
no, I have questions for you. I was amazed when I saw that in Dallas, the amount of technology and effort you'd put into those yards. I was disappointed that you had so much help on it. Yeah.
So here's a scary story. You come back from the Dallas convention, and then the yard goes back up in the garage, and the wireless router gets put somewhere, and the power supply for it gets separated from it, and then the Raspberry Pi gets moved to another place, and then you need to borrow the SD card to go get a file off of it, and then you fast forward to the point where Gordy's in your house. We're packing the trailer. We need to go now, right? So we drove all the way to Evanston, and I did not have those pictures that show where you touch to have the yard for either the yard or for the Greeley modules we built. So on site in place, I had to redraw all those and to get them up and running. So it shows that it can be done, but would I have done it the same way again? Of course not.
No.
So now there's a backup of the backup of the backup, and there's even one online so that I could download it from anywhere in the world
Yeah.
to redo the yard. So
Yes. Yes. Online is a great gift to humans in electronics.
cool. Nobody from the crowd. Any questions? Doot, 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 doot. Brad, do you have any questions?
Thank you for asking, Speed. I was waiting. Is there, when you design a yard for a travelling layout, is there any design points that differ from being a home layout yard to take into account?
I would say yes, in as much as I've seen what people do when they show up at the yard and they unpack their stuff. I cannot plant flowers and grass and put very intricate detail like a real yard would have had. You know, like if I would put a water tank to water the steam engines. Those little details gets destroyed in a hurry. I mean, people just show up at the yard and they put their elbow right on top of the track, and you're like just glad there wasn't a car underneath it. So there is some thought to where you put things and how you protect it from the traveling people that travel with the yard. Now, for the design itself, it has the same principles as any operating yard, because that's really what we like to do, is to operate. It's not to just see trains leave and come back, unless it's a staging yard and you want to put stuff there. So all my yards on my home layout has a yard lead long enough to pull all the cars out and to put the whole lead back in, or grab all the cars from the arrival track and put it somewhere else. So I did the same stuff for that. Engine facility, the caboose track that's now a field track, same idea. So not way different for Free-moN people who like to operate. But I did notice that if I'm going to do some serious scenery, then it's got to be away from the edge.
Speed, as far as scenery goes, do you have experience with using static grass yet?
Not yet.
Okay. It is the gift to us guys who do modules, because it is durable beyond what you thought it could possibly be.
That's good news.
Our original Operations Roadshow was built probably 5 years before flock became a thing, and we experimented with it on the edge of the layout, which was a foolish thing to do, that virtually everybody came into first and saw and touched. And unbelievably, it has stayed good for 20 years, with people dragging their hands through it intentionally, leaning on it by mistake. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. Now, that particular area was put down with full-strength white glue underneath it, and was really careful to concentrate on making sure the flock stood up. So, but yeah, it's a godsend to the edge of our layouts.
Now, I did hear a rumor that if you do attend the Novi 2025 NMRA convention, that there might be a chance to go see those modules.
Yes, sir, there is. We will be open on Thursday for the regular tour. We also are going to host operating sessions both on Monday at noon and again on Thursday at 1 o'clock to 4.
Oh, wow.
So you'll have both a chance to operate on the original HO layout and to see the layout in its natural environment. And given a year, I might actually clean up the train room so it looks presentable. No promise, but there is a chance.
So you know somebody that knows somebody who has the layout?
Uh, one of my closest friends is the fellow who houses the layout. Uh, I'll share a little story about it. We built this layout expecting to have it stored all the time and just take it out a couple of times a year to play with it for a big long weekend. Uh, about 3 years into the build, which was happening on the front porch of my 120-year-old house, uh, Jeff Fryman, who now houses it, was living in literally a log cabin in the city of Saline. Saline would have been real happy for him to burn down the cabin. So Jeff decided it was the time of his life he should build an actual adult home. And he took our drawn footprint of what that layout was going to be to an architect. The architect was told to create a basement to hold that layout and then put some bedrooms above it. And
Oh,
that's what
wow.
he did. So
That
he
is
has
pretty
a
cool.
custom designed basement to hold this layout. Includes a crew lounge and a restroom area and another work area to maintain the layout.
So there's two more questions, but I have another question first. Are we going to have Operations Roadshow with Free-moN in Nova as well?
Yes, we are. I'm working on that with Lee Calkins right now, getting some modules organized to come in. There will have to be some fresh ones built. They have reduced the area that they first offered us down a little bit. It's not as going to be as generous as what we had in Dallas by any means, but we'll still be able to set up roughly 22 or 23-foot wide layout, 50 or
Okay,
60 feet long. So
cool.
it's going to be more than adequate for having the
Okay.
Operations Roadshow.
Just let me know if I need to bring any of the Texas modules there. Here's the questions. Is there a diagram of the legs from the first half of the presentation? Would you be willing to share your leg design?
I do not have a diagram of that. I tried to draw one up and realized my ability is not there. What I will do though is I will put together a mini clinic on how those legs were assembled, and
Okay,
we'll offer it again in the future.
thank you. And
Yeah.
then someone asked, is code 80 track standard with modular standards because of pizza cutter wheels? I believe we only do code 55.
55. Yeah.
So
55 is standard on Free-moN.
Free-moN.
Uh, on N-Track, 80 is standard.
Hmm.
So,
And then I do know that there's a little controversy about the pizza cutter thing. I personally think if you like your things to derail on all the tenants that I have, then go ahead, bring your pizza cutters. If you like the
yeah.
click, 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 click noise, then that's also your choice. So,
Well, I do not say this to be derisive, but Free-moN and the modelers who participate are trying to take the modeling to a higher level than just the standard N-gauge track will handle.
correct.
And pizza cutter wheels just are not part of the mindset of modeling in this particular modular system.
And does it look good? I don't think so.
The, the pizza cutters? No, I
Yes.
don't think so either.
Yeah.
No.
Cool. Well, John, thank you to you for your help.
Oh,
Um,
I have a little sidebar to add to it. You know, you asked me to do this clinic when we were in Dallas, and I readily agreed, and that was great. You walked away, and I forgot. So when you rattled my cage here a couple of months ago to say, "Hey, have you got your clinic ready?" And I went, "Oh." uh, I was 3 days away from loading the entire set of modules into a trailer to send to Evanston, and I wasn't going to get them back anytime soon. I still haven't got them back. So I had to scramble really hard to find any kind of pictures to do a presentation with.
well, thank you. And for those
Yeah,
who missed Evanston, there was 450 modules there, and I believe another 150 in the T-track and N-track groups. And so we occupied, I think, 15,000 square feet, and it took me more than 6 hours to run my train across all the modules. Didn't even get to the island of Sodor. They had this little secret hideaway place where you couldn't get to. You had to I call it three fingers. In HO it's 050, and in N scale I call it 030 because you only need three fingers to pick up an N scale car. So I missed the island of Sodor. That will be my first attempt next time in 2027. So that was a lot of fun. I mean, we had two full operating sessions, and the yard produced, I think, 4 or 5 trains every session, and I did not hear of anybody complaining any bit about it. And so that was quite a bit of fun. Cool. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Brad, for streaming. And the next NMRAx will be the fourth Saturday in September. That's correct. I don't have the date right in front of me. Um, and if you have any clinics you would like to present, we always need more people. It's easy to do another hour. It's hard to do just 1 hour because Brad and Martyn has to get up for all this. So thank you, Brad. Thank you, John. Thank you, audience, for watching.
All right. Thank you much.